if you really sit down and look at the history of exploration, I mean, really look at the popular narrative of it, you start to notice a very specific aesthetic.
You definitely do.
It's particularly true of the so-called heroic age at the turn of the 20th century. You usually see a lot of tragedy.
Oh, absolutely. It was almost a cultural requirement of the time, especially in, the British tradition.
Right. You see starving men dragging these heavy wooden sledges through blizzards, ships getting crushed by pack ice, poets dying in tents, and just this general vibe of romantic, heroic doom.
It was this idea that the struggle itself was the point. If you weren't suffering, if you weren't fighting nature with, I don't know, grit and wool sweaters, were you really exploring? It was exploration as a sort of moral play.
Exactly. It's like they wanted it to be hard, but then there's this one guy, a guy who looked at the most hostile environments on Earth places that had literally killed hundreds of people before him, and he didn't just survive them.
No, he mastered them.
He mastered them. He turned the struggle into a logistics spreadsheet.
It really is a different caliber of success. We are talking about a man who essentially looked at the globe and said, checkmate.
Checkmate. That is the perfect way to put it. We are diving deep today into the life of Roald Amundsen. And the more I looked into his resume for this, the more I found myself just shaking my head in disbelief.
It's pretty wild.
It reads like an adventure novel that a publisher would reject for being too unrealistic.
Yeah.
He wasn't just the first to the South Pole, which is, the headline everyone knows.
That's a big one.
He was the first to navigate the Northwest Passage.
Yeah.
And if you look at the fine print of history, he was arguably the first verified person to reach the North Pole, too.
That's a bold claim, but the data really backs it up, and we'll get into why the other claimants fall short later. But what's so fascinating about Amundsen is that he represents this massive shift in the philosophy of exploration.
How so?
He is a figure of transition. He bridges the gap between that romantic, heroic age and the modern mechanical age. He wasn't just brave, he was a meticulous planner. He treated exploration not as some poetic struggle against the elements, but as a scientific problem to be solved.
A problem with a solution. I love that. So our mission today is to unpack exactly how a boy from Norway became the most successful polar explorer in history by doing the exact opposite of what everyone else was doing.
Yeah, we're going to see how he traded romance for efficiency and how that decision, that mindset, made all the difference between life and death.
Okay, so to get to the method, we have to understand the obsession.
You do. And to do that, we have to go back to the beginning. We need to start in Gjøa, Norway in the late 19th century.
Right. Born in 1872. And the funny thing is, for a guy who became the ultimate sailor and explorer, his start was, well, let's call it reluctant.
That's a good word for it.
He came from a family of ship owners and captains. You'd think he'd be on a boat from day one, hauling ropes and tying knots.
But there was a pretty big obstacle. His mother. She had seen what the sea does to men. The shipwrecks, the drownings, the endless absences. She wanted a very different life for her fourth son. She made him promise to avoid the maritime trade entirely.
And what did she want for him instead?
She wanted him to be a doctor.
The classic be a doctor pressure, it's universal. And honestly, it makes sense given the era. Being a ship captain was high status, but high risk. Being a doctor was pure safety.
It was. And Amundsen, being a dutiful son, actually kept that promise. He went to university, he studied medicine, he was on track for a safe, respectable life on land.
But his heart wasn't in it.
Not at all. The sources tell us that even while he was memorizing anatomy, his mind was elsewhere. He was sleeping with his windows open in the freezing Norwegian winter, supposedly to harden his constitution.
He was secretly training. That is incredible dedication.
It really speaks to a repressed obsession, doesn't it? And he wasn't just studying medicine, he had been reading the narratives of Sir John Franklin.
Okay, so Franklin was the British explorer who famously disappeared with 2 ships and 129 men trying to find the Northwest Passage in the 1840s.
The very same.
And most people would read about Franklin. We're talking starvation, lead poisoning, cannibalism, freezing to death, and think, wow, I'm definitely staying inside where it's warm.
Not Amundsen. He read them with, and this is his quote, fervid fascination. He decided that suffering in the Arctic was his destiny.
That fervid fascination is key. He wasn't looking for comfort. He was looking for the crucible.
He was. But he respected the promise to his mother. He stayed in school until he was 21 years old. And then his mother passed away.
And this is the part that I find so relatable in a kind of a dark way. It's that moment where the external pressure valve just releases.
Yeah.
The second he was released from that promise, he quit university, dropped out.
Immediately. Traded the stethoscope for the sea. He didn't hesitate. He signed on to various ships to get his hours in to learn the ropes. But he knew he needed real polar experience. You don't just, walk to the North Pole.
So where does he get it?
In 1897, he signs on as first mate on the Belgian Antarctic expedition aboard a ship called the Belgica.
And this voyage, the Belgica, this isn't just a job for him. This is the training ground. This is where he earns his stripes. But it sounds like a complete nightmare.
It was a trial by fire, or I guess a trial by ice. The expedition was led by Adrien de Gerlache, a Belgian officer. They went down to the Antarctic Peninsula for scientific research, but they made a critical error.
What was that?
They stayed too late in the season. They became the first expedition in history to overwinter in Antarctica. They got locked in the sea ice at 70 degrees south.
And just to clarify for everyone listening, overwintering in Antarctica isn't like renting a cabin for the season. We're talking about the ship being frozen solid into the drifting pack ice. You are completely trapped.
Trapped in total darkness for months. The sun goes down in May, and it doesn't come back until July or August. The temperature drops to 40 below zero. And the ice is constantly shifting and grinding against the hull.
It must sound like the ship is being chewed up.
That's what they said. The psychological toll was just immense.
I can't even imagine.
And the crew was not prepared. They didn't have the right clothing. They didn't have enough food. And morale it collapsed. Men were going insane. The commander, de Gerlache, fell ill. But the real killer was scurvy.
Which is a death sentence in those days.
Yeah.
We know now it's a vitamin C deficiency, but back then the science was still pretty murky.
Right. They knew fresh food helped, but they didn't really understand why. They were relying on European preserved foods, canned meats, dried biscuits. These have zero vitamin C.
So what happens to them?
The men's gums started swelling, their teeth loosened, old wounds reopened, and they became lethargic. They were dying.
And this is where we see the first aha moment for Amundsen. And strangely, it comes from the ship's doctor, an American named Frederick Cook.
Frederick Cook is he's a very complicated figure in polar history, often remembered as a fraudster later in life. But on the Belgica, the man was a hero. He realized that the canned food was killing them. He formed a hypothesis that any fresh meat, would stop the scurvy.
So what was on the menu?
Penguin and seal. There were animals around the ship on the ice. Cook ordered the crew to hunt them, but here's the catch. He wanted them to eat the meat fresh and barely cooked.
Oh, I can see where this is going.
And this was a huge problem for the crew. You have to remember, these were European sailors in the 1890s. They were used to salt, beef, and bread. The idea of eating semi-raw penguin steak, which is dark, oily, and fishy, was repulsive to them.
I can imagine.
De Gerlache actually forbade it at first. He thought it was uncivilized.
Uncivilized. That's the word that gets you killed in these situations.
Precisely. But Amundsen didn't care about being civilized. He cared about surviving. He saw that the men who ate the fresh meat, specifically the organ meat, the offal, were getting better.
Oh, so he ate it.
He ate it. He forced it down. And he recovered.
And that seems to be the light bulb turning on. He realizes that European conventions, this is how we do things in civilization, are actually liabilities in the wild.
Exactly. It was his first great lesson in pragmatism over tradition. If the local resources, even if it's raw seal meat, keep you alive, you use them. You ignore what is proper and you do what works. This mindset became the foundation of his entire career. He realized the Arctic doesn't care about your manners.
So he survives the Belgica, comes back to Europe, and now he's ready for the big leagues. He sets his sights on the Northwest Passage.
The Northwest Passage, the holy grail of navigation for centuries.
Right, for 400 years, since the time of Columbus almost, sailors had been trying to find a route over the top of Canada, connecting the Atlantic to the Pacific. It was the shortcut to the riches of the East.
But the map of that area is just a nightmare. It's thousands of islands, shifting ice, fog, dead ends.
And it had claimed hundreds of lives, including his hero, Franklin. The British Royal Navy had thrown everything at it, massive ships, hundreds of men, huge supplies of coal. They tried to brute force their way through.
And they failed every time.
So how does Amundsen approach this? Does he get a bigger battleship, a bigger crew?
He does the complete opposite. And this is where his genius for strategy starts to shine. He realized that the massive British naval vessels failed because they were too deep. They had deep drafts. They got stuck in the shallow, uncharted channels of the archipelago.
Okay, so he needs a smaller boat.
A much smaller boat. Amundsen bought a tiny 47-foot fishing sloop called the Gjøa.
47 feet. That is incredibly small for an Arctic expedition. That's smaller than many recreational yachts today.
It was tiny. It was 45 tons. It had a crew of only 6 men, plus Amundsen. And it had a shallow draft, meaning it could ride high in the water and hug the coast, slipping over rocks that would tear the bottom out of a larger ship.
Did it have an engine?
It even had a small 13-horsepower kerosene engine.
13 horsepower. My lawnmower might have more power than that.
It was modest, just enough to push them through calm water or help steer in the ice, but the ship was only half the story. The real breakthrough of the Northwest Passage expedition, which launched in 1903, was what happened when they stopped.
Where did they stop?
They spent 2 full winters at King William Island in a small natural harbor now known as Gjøa Haven.
And this is what I like to call his Inuit MBA.
That's a fantastic way to describe it. He didn't just sit on the boat waiting for the ice to melt, playing cards and eating biscuits. He went ashore and lived with the local Netsilik Inuit.
So this was the key.
This was arguably the most important period of his life. He approached them not as a superior European who had come to civilize them, but as a student who knew nothing.
So what specifically did he learn? Because this is the stuff that ends up winning him the South Pole later, right?
Oh, directly. The first major lesson was clothing. The British explorers were obsessed with wool. They wore layers of heavy wool and windproof gabardine cloth.
Which sounds warm.
It is until it's not. Wool has a fatal flaw in the Arctic. When you work hard hauling sleds, building camps, you sweat. Wool absorbs that moisture. When you stop moving, that wet wool freezes. It becomes like a suit of ice armor, hard and cold. It sucks the heat right out of your body.
So while the British are freezing in their damp wool sweaters, what are the Inuit wearing?
Loose-fitting animal furs, caribou skin, mostly. The Inuit design was ingenious. It was loose so air could circulate. As you moved, the warm air stayed in, but the moisture could vent out through the neck and the openings. It created a perfect microclimate around the body.
So it was lighter, warmer, and crucially, it kept you dry.
Exactly. Amundsen swapped his wool for fur immediately. He essentially adopted the local technology.
And what was the second thing?
Transport. The Inuit taught him how to manage dog teams. Now, Europeans had used dogs before, but usually pretty badly. The Inuit taught him the nuance, how to feed them high-fat diets to keep their energy up, how to breed them, how to hitch them. The Inuit used a fan hitch where the dogs spread out, which is much safer on thin ice.
And you have to contrast that with the British method.
Well, the British often preferred man-hauling.
Which is exactly what it sounds like.
It is literally strapping men into harnesses and having them pull the sleds like horses. They thought it was more noble. It showed the superiority of the human spirit.
But Amundsen just thought it was inefficient.
Completely. Why burn your own calories when a dog can do the work better?
There's that word again. Efficient.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't care about looking noble. He cares about calories and speed.
And that efficiency paid off. The Gjøa successfully navigated the passage. It took 3 years, weaving through the islands, mapping the magnetic pole as they went. They finally cleared the archipelago in August 1905. They saw a whaling ship from San Francisco, and they knew they had made it. They had connected the oceans.
But he couldn't just tweet about it. And this leads to one of my favorite anecdotes about his obsession. He completes this historic feat, something people have died trying to do for centuries. But he's frozen in the ice near the finish line in Alaska for the winter. He needs to tell the world. So what does he do?
He can't sit still. He travels 500 miles overland in the dead of winter, from the ship to a telegraph station in Eagle, Alaska.
500 miles, just to send a telegram.
On skis and dog sleds. And then, after sending the message, he traveled 500 miles back to the ship.
That's just unbelievable.
It shows his drive for recognition. He needed to be the one to break the news. And the political context is interesting here, too. Norway had just dissolved its union with Sweden in 1905. It was a brand new, independent country with a new king, Håkon VII.
So he dedicates the win to the new king.
He does. It was a massive moment for Norwegian national identity.
So he's a national hero. He's conquered the Northwest Passage. He's got the Inuit survival skills. Naturally, he thinks, okay, I've done the West, let's go north. He wants the North Pole.
That was the original dream. He spent years preparing to drift a ship across the North Pole. He had the funding, he had the ship, the famous Fram, which was designed by Fridtjof Nansen to withstand ice pressure. But then in 1909, everything changed.
The news drops.
The news drops. Americans, Frederick Cook, his old doctor friend from the Belgica, and Robert Peary, both claim to have reached the North Pole.
We'll talk about the validity of those claims later because that's a whole other can of worms. But for Amundsen, at that moment, the prize was gone. The shop was closed.
Right. And most explorers would have canceled the expedition, or they would have gone anyway just for the science. But Amundsen wasn't just a scientist, he was a conqueror. He needed a first.
So he pivoted.
Instantly. If he couldn't be first to the north, he would be first to the south.
But he didn't tell anyone, did he? This famous South Pole deception.
Well, it was a massive secret. He knew that Robert Falcon Scott, the British explorer, was publicly preparing for a South Pole run. Scott had announced it. He was raising money for it. Amundsen feared that if he announced his plans, the Norwegian government might stop him to avoid a diplomatic incident with Britain.
Or his backers might pull out because they paid for a North Pole trip.
Exactly. So he lied. He literally set sail from Norway in the Fram, heading south, and his crew still thought they were going around Cape Horn to get to the Bering Strait and then the Arctic.
Imagine that. You're on the ship, thinking you're heading for the North Pole drift.
Yeah. And he only told them the truth when they reached Madeira, an island off the coast of Africa. He gathered the men on deck and revealed the new plan. The North Pole is gone. We're going to Antarctica. We're racing Scott.
And the crew did the mutiny.
They were Vikings at heart. They cheered, they were competitive, they agreed to the change.
And then he sends that famous telegram to Scott. It's so cold, so to the point.
Beg to inform you, Fram proceeding Antarctic.
That's it.
Polite, curt, and devastating. Scott was still making his preparations in Australia when he got that. He suddenly realized he wasn't on a scientific survey with a bit of exploration on the side. He was in a race. And he was racing against the fastest polar traveler on Earth.
So the race is on, 1911. Amundsen sets up base camp. And again, he breaks the rules. Scott sets up at McMurdo Sound on solid volcanic rock. Safe, secure.
While Amundsen sets up at the Bay of Whales.
Which was on the floating ice shelf. This is a huge gamble.
The British had looked at that area and said, no way. The ice could break off and float out to sea. If that happened, the base and everyone in it would be lost.
So why take the risk?
Because it was 60 miles closer to the pole than Scott's camp. He started the race with a 60-mile head start just by choosing a riskier parking spot. He called the camp Framheim.
And now we see the Inuit MBA in full effect during the preparation.
Oh, absolutely. While Scott was bringing motorized sledges that broke down almost immediately in the cold, and ponies, Manchurian ponies that sank into the snow and sweat through their coats.
Amundsen had dog teams.
Greenland dogs, and he dressed his men in those loose furs. The whole system was tested and proven.
We have to talk about the dogs, though, because this is the part of the story that usually makes modern listeners uncomfortable. But it is the mathematical reason he won.
It is difficult to hear, but we have to look at it through Amundsen's lens of cold, hard efficiency. He started with 52 dogs. He planned the route mathematically. He created a schedule. He calculated exactly how much weight the dogs could pull and how much food they needed.
And the equation didn't balance if he kept all the dogs alive, did it?
It did not. As the sleds got lighter, because the men were eating the supplies, they needed less pulling power. So the plan included killing the weaker dogs at specific milestones.
So they kill the dogs, and then
they fed the carcasses to the remaining dogs. And to be clear, the men ate the dog meat as well.
Wow. He called the main depot the butcher shop, didn't he?
He did. It sounds horrific to us. But look at the thermodynamics of it. It ensured a constant supply of fresh meat for the dogs, keeping the engine of the expedition strong. It provided fresh meat for the men, which prevented scurvy, and it kept the load light.
And you have to compare that to Scott.
Scott refused to use dogs in this way. He relied on man-hauling for the final push. His men were dragging hundreds of pounds of supplies. They were burning something like 6,000 calories a day and eating maybe 4,000.
They were literally starving. Their bodies were consuming their own muscle mass.
Exactly. Amundsen's team. They were actually gaining weight on the return trip.
That is a staggering contrast. Scott's team is dying of exhaustion and hunger, and Amundsen's team is eating fresh meat and riding the sleds.
It wasn't even a contest in the end. Amundsen's team established supply depots at 80, 81, and 82 degrees south. When they made the final push, the weather held, the dogs performed perfectly, and on December 14th, 1911, Amundsen and his team planted the Norwegian flag at the South Pole.
Checkmate.
Checkmate. They named the camp Polheim, home of the pole. And in a final gesture of confidence, or perhaps insurance, Amundsen left a small tent. Inside was some gear, a letter addressed to King Haakon, and a note for Scott.
What did the note say?
He essentially asked Scott to do him a favor. Please deliver this letter to the King of Norway if we perish on the way back.
Imagine being Scott. You arrive at the pole a month later. You are defeated, exhausted, frostbitten. You know the return journey is going to be hell, and you find a tent with a note from the guy who beat you asking you to be his postman.
It must have been psychologically crushing, and as we know, Scott and his party tragically died on the return journey, just 11 miles from their supply depot.
While Amundsen's return, by contrast,
Was smooth. He arrived back at Framheim on the exact day he had scheduled.
so he's done the Northwest Passage, he's done the South Pole, he's the most famous explorer on Earth. The world is throwing parades for him. But he's not done. He still has that original itch, the North Pole.
The obsession never left him. He felt like the job wasn't finished, but this next phase, this is where things get messy. The precision of the South Pole gives way to a decade of chaos.
Okay.
In 1918, he built a new ship, the Maud. And the plan here was the drift, right?
Yes, that's it.
He wanted to replicate what Nansen had tried years earlier, freeze the ship into the ice north of Siberia and just let the natural current carry it over the North Pole.
This sounds like an agonizingly slow way to travel.
It's terrible. You are passive. You are just sitting there. The expedition lasted from 1918 to 1925, 7 years.
7 years.
And it was largely a failure in terms of the primary goal. They never got the drift trajectory right. They just circled in the ice north of Russia.
But Amundsen's life during this time reads like an action movie script written by a chaotic 12-year-old. He just could not catch a break.
It really does. In this period alone, he suffered a broken arm. He was poisoned by carbon monoxide from a faulty lamp and nearly died. It permanently damaged his heart. And in one terrifying incident, he was attacked by a polar bear.
He fought a polar bear.
Seriously. The bear knocked him down and mauled him. His dog actually saved him by distracting the bear long enough for Amundsen to escape. He survived, but he was physically falling apart. He was aging.
And financially, he was ruined, right?
Completely. The Maud expedition was a black hole for money. He went bankrupt. He was dodging creditors. But amidst this chaos, there's this strange personal story that rarely gets told.
What's that?
During the drift near Siberia, he adopted, or at least took guardianship, of 2 young indigenous girls, Kakonita and Camilla.
This is a side of him we don't often see. The family man Amundsen.
It's strange, isn't it? He brought them back to Norway. He sent them to school. He truly seemed to care for them. It looked like he was trying to build a domestic life. But when the bankruptcy hit, and he had to leave for his next expedition to make money and restore his reputation, he sent them back to Russia.
That is heartbreaking.
It is. It's a tragic, confusing chapter. It highlights how his obsession with the poles always seemed to override his personal life eventually. The mission always came first.
So the ship drift fails. The money is gone. He's in his 50s. Most people would retire. Amundsen looks at the calendar, sees it's the 1920s, and says,
Ships are too slow. I need an airplane.
The pivot to aviation. This is the final act of his career. He realized that the future of exploration was in the air.
So in 1925, he scrapes together enough money, mostly from a wealthy American named Lincoln Ellsworth, to buy 2 flying boats, the Dornier Wall N-24 and the N-25.
And this leads to what I think is the most intense survival story of his entire life. Forget the South Pole. This is the one that gives me anxiety.
It's unbelievable. They fly these planes up to 87 degrees north. They are hunting for the pole. They land on the ice to take measurements.
Which was a huge mistake.
A huge mistake. The leads, the patches of open water, started to close. The ice shifted. One plane, the N-24, was damaged and rendered useless. The other plane, the N-25, was frozen into a bowl of ice.
So you have 6 men, 1 functioning plane, and the ice is closing in.
And they are 600 miles from civilization, no radio, no one knows where they are. They had to get that plane into the air. But you can't take off on jagged ice. They had to build a runway.
With what? They didn't have bulldozers?
Shovels, wooden shovels and ice axes. For 3 weeks, these 6 men moved 600 tons of ice and wet snow. They had to level a strip long enough for the plane to gain speed.
And here's the kicker. What were they eating?
They had anticipated a short flight. They were on strict rations, about ½ pound to a pound of food per day, mostly chocolate and biscuits.
Moving 600 tons of ice on a pound of food a day.
It was a desperate race against death. If the summer melt started in earnest, the ice would break up completely and they'd drown or drift away. If they waited too long, they'd starve. Finally, after several failed attempts, they crammed all 6 men into the one remaining plane.
6 men in 1 small plane.
A brilliant pilot, Hjalmar Reiser-Larsen, gunned the engine. They bounced over the uneven ice. They cleared the ice ridge at the end of the runway by inches. Literally inches. They flew back to Svalbard on fumes.
When they returned to civilization, everyone had assumed they were dead. It was a resurrection.
It revived Amundsen's fame. He was back, but He still hadn't reached the North Pole. 87 degrees is close, but it's not the pole.
He is stubborn, I'll give him that. So this sets the stage for 1926, the airship Norge.
Now, this is a dirigible, a semi-rigid airship. It wasn't a plane. It was a lighter-than-air vessel. It was designed by an Italian engineer, Umberto Nobile. This was a joint expedition. Amundsen as the leader, Ellsworth as the financier, and Nobile as the pilot and designer.
They flew from Svalbard over the North Pole to Alaska. And this flight on May 12, 1926, this is the moment that potentially rewrites the record books.
It does. Because, as we touched on earlier, the previous claims to the North Pole were shaky.
Let's quickly debunk them. Frederick Cook, 1908.
Widely considered fraudulent. His descriptions of the sun and shadows didn't match the latitude. The Inuit guides later said they never went out of sight of land. He faked it.
Robert Peary, 1909.
Heavily disputed. His navigational log has blank pages where the critical data should be, and his claimed speed, he claimed to travel 3 times faster than he'd ever traveled before on the return trip. It's just physically impossible.
And Admiral Byrd. He flew a plane in 1926, just a few days before Amundsen.
Modern analysis of his flight diaries suggests he turned back early due to an oil leak. He likely fell short of the pole.
So if Cook lied, Peary missed, and Byrd fell short.
Then Roald Amundsen and the crew of the Norge are the first people to verifiably reach the North Pole. They drop flags, Norwegian, American, Italian down onto the ice.
That is the checkmate. He bagged the Northwest Passage, the South Pole, and technically he's the first true owner of the North Pole too. He is the undisputed king of the ice.
And yet he couldn't enjoy the victory. The aftermath of the Norge flight was bitter. Amundsen and Noble hated each other.
Why? What happened?
It was a clash of personalities and cultures. Noble was flamboyant. He loved the press. He wore his uniform. Amundsen was stoic, grim, and felt Noble was just a hired driver.
A Nobile's side.
Noble felt Amundsen was just a passenger who did nothing but sit there. They fought over credit in the newspapers for years. It got very, very ugly.
Which makes the end of this story so incredibly ironic. It's like a Greek tragedy.
It is the ultimate irony. 2 years later, in 1928, Noble wants to prove he doesn't need Amundsen. He organizes a new Italian expedition with a new airship, the Italia.
And it goes wrong.
Horribly wrong. The Italia crashes on the return from the pole. The control car smashes onto the ice. Noble and several survivors are stranded on the drifting pack ice, wounded, with a radio, living in a red tent.
A massive international rescue operation is launched. Ships, planes from everywhere. And Amundsen is sitting in Norway. He hears that his rival, the guy he's been trashing in the papers, the guy he despises, is dying on the ice.
And what does he do? He stands up and volunteers. He joins the rescue effort.
Why? Was it guilt? Was it honor? What was it?
I think it was destiny. I don't think he could resist the call. He secured a plane, a French Latham 47 flying boat. It wasn't the best plane for the job, but it was what he could get. He took off from Tromsø on June 18, 1928, heading into the Barents Sea to save Nobile.
And that's the last time anyone ever saw him alive.
The plane never arrived. Nobile was eventually rescued by others, a Swedish pilot and a Russian icebreaker, but Amundsen vanished.
Did they find anything? Any trace?
Weeks later, a wing float and a fuel tank washed up on the coast. The float had been modified. It looks like someone had tried to attach a second float to it using a spare bolt. This suggests they survived the crash initially. They were in the water trying to stabilize the plane or make a raft.
But the Barents Sea is freezing.
Hypothermia would have set in within minutes. They likely died in the water. The search went on for months. Modern submarines have looked for the wreckage as recently as 2009. Nothing. The ocean kept him.
It's a heavy ending. So when we look back at this incredible resume, Northwest Passage, South Pole, North Pole, what is the legacy?
Well, scientifically and geographically, it's immense. The Amundsen Scott South Pole Station stands there today, a permanent human presence at the bottom of the world. There's a crater on the moon named after him. He proved that polar travel wasn't about fighting nature, but adapting to it.
And he validated the wisdom of indigenous peoples.
In an era when most Europeans dismissed them as savages, that's a huge part of it.
And personally, he remains a bit of an enigma, doesn't he?
He was a lifelong bachelor. We know now he had secret romances. He was in love with a married woman, Kiss Bennett, for years. He was actually engaged to an American, Besma Gids, at the time of his death.
No way.
She was on a ship to Norway to marry him when the news came that he was lost.
Oh, that's awful. And there's that persistent rumor about descendants in the Arctic.
Yes, in Gjøa Haven. This is a sensitive but important part of the story. There have been claims for decades that Amundsen fathered children with Inuit women during those 2 winters in the Northwest Passage. 2 men, Bob Kanona and Paul Ikwulak, grew up believing they were his sons.
Did the science ever back that up?
A Y-DNA analysis was done in 2012 on the Ikwulak family line. It did not match Amundsen's direct male lineage. So genetically, the proof isn't there. But the stories persist in the community, and in a way, it speaks to how deeply he integrated with them. He wasn't just passing through, he was part of the fabric of the place for a time.
It really does. When I think about Amundsen now, I don't just see the guy in the fur coat with the flag. I see a guy who was almost trapped by his own competence. He was so good at the ice, he couldn't exist anywhere else.
I think that's a very profound observation. Amundsen spent his entire life trying to conquer the frozen wasteland. He sacrificed his medical career, his financial stability, his relationships, and eventually his life.
He went to save an enemy and died doing it.
But perhaps he didn't view it as saving an enemy. Perhaps when the call came, he just saw an excuse to go back. To go back to the only place where he truly made sense. The civilization of banquets and debts and newspapers was messy. The ice was clean, it was binary, you survive or you don't.
And here's a final provocative thought for you to chew on. Amundsen disappeared into the Barents Sea without a trace. No body, no grave, just gone. Was that a tragedy? Or was that the only fitting end for a man who felt more at home in the white silence than he ever did in the noise of the world?
A Viking funeral, provided by the Arctic itself.
Exactly. Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll see you on the next expedition.